We're going to be tackling a monster of a topic. Why does intelligence matter? From school to work, from people smarts to book smarts, intelligence influences many different areas of our lives. It's a major factor that helps us navigate the world. But it's not the whole story. So, in this video, we're going to unpack this monster of a topic and see what else is going on in this space of human cognitive abilities and get a sense of whether intelligence is the main player in this game of life and how much does it contribute to our success. Intelligence testing has long been a subject of incredible debate. Critics argue that these tests are limited in scope and that they fail to capture the multi-dimensional nature of human intellect. As educational psychologist Ken Richardson contends, IQ tests do not measure cognitive ability, but rather conformity with the culture of the test's designers. Similarly, the late and great paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould, he wrote the book The Mismeasure of Man, criticized the reduction of intelligence to a single quantifiable measure. He stated that the abstraction of intelligence as a single entity, its location within the brain, its quantification as one number for each individual, and the use of these numbers to rank people is a fallacy. And these perspectives highlight the complexities, pitfalls, and even the potential politics of measuring intelligence. However, many scholars have sought to define intelligence in ways that encompass its broad applications in everyday life. For example, the father of cognitive psychology, Ulrich Nieser, emphasized that intelligence involves the ability to understand complex ideas, to adapt effectively to the environment, to learn from experience, to engage in various forms of reasoning, and to overcome obstacles by taking thought. Echoing these sentiments, Linda Gottfredson in 1997 described intelligence as a very general mental capability that involves the ability to reason, plan, solve problems, think abstractly, comprehend complex ideas, learn quickly, and learn from experience. So these definitions underscore the role of intelligence in problem solving, learning, and adapting to new situations. So it's not like it's unimportant in everyday life. Kevin McGrew, a prominent figure in intelligence research, and he is a major contributor to the Woodcock-Johnson IQ test, which is one of the most popular in the world, went further by suggesting that intelligence is like the holy grail of human abilities and is one of the most successful undertakings attributed to modern psychology. So who's correct? Is intelligence truly as powerful as its advocates would have us believe? Or is it, as its critics suggest, just another piece of the pseudoscience puzzle, big on promises but short on real-world impact? So let's tackle that question head on. But before we do, let's consider what makes a good scientific theory in the first place. Well, good science is most certainly not just good talk. Instead, it has to be built on a coherent set of independent, corroborating evidence that supports the theory while also withstanding attempts to falsify it. As the great philosopher Karl Popper insisted, a truly robust scientific theory is one that must be testable and vulnerable to refutation, like predicting the position of a planet using Newton's laws and then checking to see if it's really there, just to verify that problem or to falsify it. But human behavior isn't as predictable as the movement of planets. The famous physicist Stephen Hawking once said, "While physics and mathematics may tell us how the universe began, they are not much use in predicting human behavior because there are far too many equations to solve." And in the social sciences, we rarely get the kind of clean falsification Popper was describing. So we've got to instead weigh up the evidence, considering on balance how consistently different lines of independent strands of evidence converge upon or even diverge from the predictions of the theory. Cronbach and Meehl, in a famous paper in 1955, captured this complexity with their concept of the nomological network. And they argued that a robust scientific theory should connect to other validated constructs and observations that are expected to relate to the theory, like an interconnecting web of evidence linking related ideas, predictions, and results. For example, if intelligence theory predicts that smarter people learn new tasks more quickly, we should see that reflected not just in test scores, but also in academic achievement, job performance, and even health outcomes. And if intelligence is truly a general property of the mind and not just a specific cognitive ability, then it should be the case that if we know the grade that a student receives in one class like mathematics, then we should be able to predict their grade in other classes like languages and sciences. For intelligence theory to stand up to scientific scrutiny, it's got to demonstrate that it's more than just abstract concepts. It has to show real-world relevance and predictive power. So if you're not convinced about its theoretical validity, we're going to spend some time in the next few minutes looking into how intelligence connects to some of life's most important outcomes. And from there, you can decide whether or not it lives up to the hype. The main areas of life that we're going to look into include educational success, career achievement, social relationships, mate selection, and physical health. So let's get on with it. One of the most important areas where intelligence's influence is clear and where the evidence is especially strong is education. Researchers in this space consistently find that intelligence predicts both how far we go in school, our educational attainment, and how well we do in school, our academic achievement. And this is especially sensitive to predictions at the lower end of the ability distribution. For example, in a massive study with over 1 million Danish men, they found that low IQ was a powerful predictor of unsuccessful educational outcomes, including leaving school early and failing to attain vocational qualifications in later years. Similarly, Deary in 2007 reported a very strong correlation of 0.81 between general intelligence at the age of 11 and national exam performance at age 16 in a sample of over 70,000 English children. Specifically, Deary found that the correlation between a latent intelligence trait measured through the IQ test and a latent trait of educational achievement, so academic G, was 0.81, so a very strong correlation there. This was later verified in another study with over 1,000 participants with Kaufman and colleagues who found a mean correlation of 0.83 between what we call psychometric G extracted from the IQ tests and academic G extracted from academic achievement scores, suggesting that they're highly interrelated and deeply intertwined constructs. Now, there's also been a number of meta-analyses in this area, and one of which was by Roth and colleagues in 2015. They found a population-corrected correlation of 0.54 between intelligence and school grades across 240 studies with over 105,000 participants, underscoring a very consistent link between intelligence and educational performance, and even slightly stronger associations as the years of schooling went on. So in the earlier years, less strong correlations, but in the later years of high school, secondary school, and post-secondary education, there were stronger correlations. And it's not just a one-way street. Another meta-analysis by Tucker Drob and Ritchie in 2018 showed us that for each additional year of education, you could boost your IQ by between 1 and 5 points, which is huge when you come to think of it. So that illustrates that education and intelligence build off each other over time. They're reciprocally determined. Increasing your education will increase your IQ. Increasing your IQ will help you get better education. So they're intertwined constructs. But intelligence isn't just about book smarts. It's also about influencing other areas of life, such as social success. We often talk about people smarts, skills like reading emotions, understanding social dynamics, and resolving conflict. Some researchers have tried to separate people skills from intelligence, book smarts and people smarts as we know them. In the academic world, however, the most famous challenges to the general theory of intelligence are by Robert Sternberg with his triarchic theory, which divides intelligence into analytical, creative, and practical components, and Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, which proposes independent abilities like linguistic, musical, interpersonal intelligence. There's 8 or 9 of them altogether. But even before Sternberg and Gardner, there were plenty of people who were challenging the idea of the G factor. Guilford's structure of intellect model proposed over 120 different mental abilities, while Jerry Fedor's modular theory emphasized specialized cognitive modules in the brain that were built around common anatomical networks or hubs of neurons. In the popular press, even Daniel Goleman's Emotional Intelligence book argued that emotional awareness and regulation, which is essentially EQ, matters more than IQ. Also famously, Angela Duckworth's concept of grit, essentially a rebranding of a personality trait known as conscientiousness, claims that passion and perseverance outshine IQ, and not even by a small amount. She claimed by a long shot. However, rigorous controlled studies consistently showed that general intelligence remains a much stronger predictor of success across many domains of life compared to emotional intelligence or grit. For example, a massive body of decades-long research into the role of human intelligence and occupational success, so job performance, by Schmidt, Hunter, and other colleagues, found that general mental ability, or GMA, is the best single predictor of job performance and learning. It has higher validity than any other measure. And this was when it was compared for incremental validity with things like integrity, conscientiousness, agreeableness, so personality traits as well as character traits and attitudinal dispositions. So altogether, those things only contributed a small amount or added a small amount of value to the predictive information that you'd get from just knowing someone's IQ alone. And it's not just a trait found exclusively in Western populations. We also see the influence of the G factor in many other countries and cultures. For example, Warren and Birmingham conducted a large-scale cross-cultural study that examined whether Spearman's G, the general factor of intelligence, emerges consistently across different nations and cultures. And lo and behold, when they analysed data from 97 samples drawn from 31 non-Western, non-industrialised nations involving a total of over 50,000 individuals, their findings were striking because they found a single factor emerged unambiguously from 71 samples, 73% of their sample, and that 23 of the remaining 26 samples, which was at 88%, produced a single second order factor. So they concluded that these results show that G appears in many cultures and is likely a universal phenomenon in humans. In their public significance statement, they were even stronger with their claims. They said, this study shows that one conceptualization of intelligence called Spearman's G is present in over 90 samples from 31 non-Western, non-industrialized nations. This means that intelligence is likely a universal trait in humans. Such findings lend robust cross-cultural support to the theory of general intelligence, and it reinforces the idea that G is indeed a fundamental aspect of human cognitive architecture, regardless of culture or socioeconomic status or circumstance. But intelligence doesn't just help you solve geeky problems or perform well in school. It also plays a critical role in, drumroll, mate selection. In other words, how other people think you are. According to evolutionary psychology, intelligence may serve as a fitness indicator, a sign of adaptability and resourcefulness and good genes, which are all desirable traits in a partner for procreative purposes and passing on your genes to a future generation. In what struck me as an ingenious study by Lee and colleagues back in 2002, when I first read it a few years ago, I think it perfectly sheds light on this concept of mate selection and intelligence. They explored how men and women prioritize different traits in potential mates using a mating budget methodology. This required study participants to purchase traits using different size budgets. So when budgets were low, choices became constrained, and this meant that participants' preferences were more likely to reveal the relative importance of those traits in a mate. And when women were given a lower budget and forced to prioritize which traits they'd purchase first, they did in fact spend the highest proportion of their budget on intelligence over other traits like creativity or humor, indicating that a man's intelligence was a necessity rather than a luxury among women's long-term mate selection criteria. Specifically, women in this study allocated on average over 1/5 of their low-budget mate allocation, which was over 20% more than the next closest traits, highlighting its essential role in mate choice. But this raises a really interesting question, doesn't it? Does perceived intelligence relate to real intelligence, or is it all just a smokescreen, more like a nice set of peacock feathers where perception is sometimes more important than reality? Well, to help answer this question, Prakash and colleagues in 2009 examined how women's preferences for intelligence in potential partners aligned with objectively measured intelligence using the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. They found that a man's verbal intelligence significantly predicted his appeal as both a long-term and short-term mate, even after controlling for his physical attractiveness. And this means that intelligence consistently predicted mate appeal even under conditions that support short-term mating strategies. So in summary, this line of evidence suggests that intelligence is more than just a mental skill. It's a key factor in mate selection, both in terms of its foundational importance and its consistent role in shaping our attractiveness to prospective mates. And this is because intelligence tends to signal to others not only our current health and psychological function, but it's also one of the most powerful social cues to signal future success for mating partner, which is nature's way of creating a good insurance policy for somebody that you may end up having a child with. So, if all else fails, go give your prospective partner an IQ test and you can vet out all of the bad apples and hopefully find yourself the true love that you've always been looking for. Now, given that intelligence is a major factor in preferential mate selection, it's no surprise that it's also closely tied to health outcomes and even life expectancy itself. For example, Hegeland and colleagues in 2018 found that low intelligence was a strong predictor of health support pension in Denmark, which is often an indicator of chronic health issues that can impact both morbidity and mortality, so how long people live and the quality of life they live. More broadly, research in cognitive epidemiology consistently shows that lower intelligence is associated with higher risks of illness and earlier death, so losing a number of life years lost prematurely. And that might be because higher intelligence supports better decision-making about health choices, including managing medical treatments, following health advice, and even avoiding risks that can lead to chronic disease or injury or accidents. So your health literacy and your mental calculus that you engage in to make appropriate decisions for the betterment of your health is a part of your intelligence. But let's not get too excited or dogmatic about intelligence. My goal is to just show you how broadly applicable it is. At the same time, I don't want to risk either overstating it or understating the role of intelligence in our society. All right, so no extremes there. While it is indeed an important trait, it's not the only or even perhaps the most important piece of the puzzle that shapes our life successes and failures. So intelligence is not everything, but it's also not nothing. At best, intelligence explains somewhere between 5 and 25% of major life outcomes, schooling, workplace, mate selection, and so forth. And as I've written in my own academic work, intelligence stands tall among a short crowd of contributors to life success. And that is to say that no single factor, intelligence included, can predict success on its own. Success in life is made up of many little things that in aggregate make up a big part of your life's success. Another important caveat here is that intelligence is not a morally or politically neutral topic, and of course, no discussion of intelligence would be complete without acknowledging at least some of its dark history, and there's plenty of it, trust me. The field has long been entangled with issues of genetic determinism, racism, hereditary claims, and so forth. As Carl and Woodley put it, in 2019, intelligence research has witnessed more controversies than perhaps any other area of social science. And one of the most infamous cases that I've seen in recent years involved James Watson, the co-discoverer of the DNA double helix, who in 2007 suggested that people from the African continent are inherently lower in intelligence than the people from the European continent, a statement that was rightly condemned as racist and scientifically baseless. Earlier still, in 1994, Herrnstein and Murray's now infamous book, The Bell Curve, argued that differences in social class and racial groups stemmed not from circumstance, but from differences in cognitive ability. Now, that's a claim that flipped the narrative of the time of inequality from social causes to individual defects, so a defective language around these people are deficient in IQ, so that's why we have poverty in nations, is another way to draw some of the conclusions from their work. So definitely political dynamite and morally an abhorrent conclusion to draw from, I think, a very porous and non-causal body of literature, so quite reckless in my point of view. In my own view, many of the racial IQ arguments ignore the deeply intertwined genetic nature of humans. Homo sapiens are so genetically similar that dividing us on biological grounds, especially for cognitive abilities, is almost impossible. It's far too easy for those in positions of privilege to claim it's their superior genes that got them where they are today, rather than a mix of good luck, good fortune, good circumstance. The reality is 100 years from now, those at the top of the social order are going to look very different from today, just as they did 1,000 or even 10,000 years ago, despite the fact that our underlying biology hasn't really changed. There's no evolutionary reason for it to have changed. As Byrne said in 1995, the field of intelligence is a minefield of potential social and political abuses, impassioned polemic, and misuses of science in general. So what am I arguing here? Well, I'm suggesting that the lion's share of variation in intelligence across large people groups and populations is shaped more by circumstance than by any fixed genetic lottery. That's why researchers today have got to be cautious when discussing group differences, because their words can too easily be misinterpreted, misused, and ultimately abused. As Malone said, I think he said this quite wisely in 2018, the problem is not that the IQ tests have no value, it's that we sometimes expect too much from them. Likewise, Stankov said in 2017, our obsession with intelligence has become a hindrance to the study of broadly defined human cognitive abilities. And personally, as an expert who actively researches in this field of intelligence, I think one of the biggest mistakes we've made is equating human worth with how we measure intelligence. Not only has this led to terrible historical consequences, but it's increasingly ironic in a world where artificial intelligence can easily outperform us in many areas. Intelligence is no longer the rarest of human commodities, and maybe that's a good thing because it frees us from the dangerous idea that a person's value is tied to their IQ scores. So where does that leave us? Well, intelligence does matter, don't get me wrong, but it's not everything. And if you take away only one thing from this video, I hope that it's this point. Success is a tapestry woven from many threads, and intelligence is just one of them. As Walt Whitman put it, we humans are large and we contain multitudes. Our lives are defined not just by intelligence, but by our inherent worth and dignity, the human spirit, our character, resilience, compassion, resourcefulness, and the drive to leave the world better than we found it. So does intelligence matter? Absolutely it does. It influences many important life outcomes, and this video was designed to help you understand that. But it's not the whole story. In fact, it's not even the main character in the story. The main character is you. You are so much more than your IQ.